If you've ever driven the Going to the Sun road, if you've ever stood at the edge of Grinnell Glacier and watched chunks of ancient ice calve off into the milky blue water below, leave a comment and tell me what you felt. That sense of something ending, something that's been frozen for 10,000 years, finally letting go. And maybe, just maybe, something waking up that should have stayed asleep forever. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to tell you has been my family's secret for 4 generations. And now that the glaciers are melting faster than anyone predicted, I don't think we can keep that secret much longer. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 47 years old, and I've been a park ranger at Glacier National Park for 23 years. My father, James Thompson, was a ranger here for 31 years before me. His father, Samuel, served for 28 years before that. And his father, my great-grandfather Elijah Thompson, was one of the first black rangers in the entire National Park Service, assigned to Glacier in 1932 when the park was still young. The country was still segregated, and the glaciers still covered the mountains like a frozen crown that would never melt. Elijah Thompson had to fight for that position. In 1932, black men weren't supposed to work in national parks, not as rangers anyway. They could work as laborers, cooks, porters. But ranger, that was a white man's job, according to the Park Service leadership back then. But Elijah had connections. He'd served in the 92nd Infantry Division during World War I, and one of his commanding officers had become a senator from Montana. That senator pulled strings, called in favors, and got Elijah assigned to Glacier over the objections of nearly everyone in the department. Most people thought he'd quit within a month. The isolation, the racism from his fellow rangers, the brutal Montana winters, surely it would break him. But Elijah Thompson didn't break. He stayed for 41 years, until his death in 1973. He raised his son in these mountains. He learned every trail, every peak, every hidden valley where the tourists never went. And he learned secrets about this place that he passed down to his son, who passed them to his son, who passed them to me. They called Glacier the crown of the continent back then, and they still do. The park spans over 1 million acres of northwestern Montana, right up against the Canadian border. It's home to over 700 miles of hiking trails, 130 named lakes, and, when my great-grandfather first arrived, over 150 active glaciers, ancient rivers of ice that had been grinding down these mountains since the last ice age, carving out the U-shaped valleys and dramatic cirques and hanging waterfalls that draw millions of visitors every year. Today, there are fewer than 25 glaciers left. By 2030, there might be none. Climate change is melting them faster than anyone predicted, and every summer I watch more of that ancient ice disappear into meltwater streams and glacial lakes. Most people see this as an environmental tragedy, a loss of natural beauty, a warning sign about our changing planet. I see it as something else entirely. I see it as the clock running out on a bargain my great-grandfather made 80 years ago. A bargain that's kept something contained inside that ice. Something that's been waiting patiently for thousands of years. Something that's almost free. The Blackfeet Nation has lived in the shadow of these mountains for generations beyond counting. They called the area the backbone of the world, and treated the high peaks with a reverence that the early white settlers mistook for superstition. They had stories about the glaciers, stories that the anthropologists and folklorists dismissed as primitive mythology, stories about things that lived in the ice, things that had been sealed away by the cold, things that would return when the ice melted. My great-grandfather didn't dismiss those stories. He couldn't afford to. Not after what he saw in the summer of 1932, when a research team from the University of Montana decided to drill ice cores from the heart of Grinnell Glacier. They were studying climate patterns, they said, looking for evidence of ancient temperature fluctuations in the ice, the kind of boring academic work that no one pays attention to. There were 5 researchers on that team, 4 graduate students and their professor, a man named Dr. Harold Whitmore. They set up camp at the base of the glacier in early July and spent 3 weeks drilling progressively deeper into the ice. My great-grandfather was assigned to check on them periodically, make sure they had supplies, ensure they weren't damaging the glacier more than their permits allowed. The last time he visited their camp, it was empty. Tents still standing, equipment still running, coffee still warm on the portable stove. But no people, no bodies, no sign of where they'd gone or what had happened. Just a hole in the ice that went down further than any of their drilling equipment should have been able to reach, and a sound coming from deep within it, a low, pulsing hum that made Elijah's teeth ache and his vision blur around the edges. He found them 3 days later, when the glacier shifted and expelled their bodies like a cat coughing up hairballs. Only one was still alive, a graduate student named Thomas Reed, who had somehow survived 72 hours frozen in ice that should have killed him in minutes. He never spoke again, never wrote, never communicated in any way. He spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric facility in Helena, staring at walls and occasionally screaming at things that no one else could see. The official report blamed a sudden crevasse collapse, a tragic accident in dangerous terrain. But my great-grandfather was part of the recovery team. He saw what was left of those researchers. He saw the expressions frozen on their faces, not fear exactly, but something worse. Ecstasy, rapture, as if they'd seen something beautiful in the moment of their deaths. And he saw what had been uncovered in the ice before the glacier shifted and sealed it away again. Shapes that weren't human, shapes that shouldn't exist, shapes that had been waiting in the ice since before humanity learned to walk upright. He wrote everything down in a journal that's been passed from father to son for 4 generations, a journal filled with observations, incidents, and rules that have kept the people of this park safe for almost a century, rules that I've followed my entire career. Rule number 1. Never approve research permits that involve drilling into glacial ice below 500 feet. Surface samples only. Anything deeper requires special authorization that will never be granted. Rule number 2. If a hiker reports seeing movement inside a glacier, shapes beneath the ice, shadows that don't match the surface, escort them out of the park immediately. Document the sighting but never investigate. Rule number 3. The area known as the Salamander Glacier is permanently closed to all visitors. The signs say it's due to unstable ice. The truth is something else entirely. Rule number 4. During the summer solstice, when the melt is at its peak, a Thompson must perform the containment ritual at the Grinnell Glacier overlook. This has been done every year since 1933. The words were taught to my great-grandfather by a Blackfeet elder named Running Wolf. They are not written in the journal. They are passed down orally, father to son, and must never be recorded. Rule number 5. If the average summer temperature exceeds 85 degrees for more than 2 consecutive weeks, implement Emergency Protocol 7. This has never happened, but the instructions are clear. Evacuate all visitors from the backcountry, close the high-altitude trails, and pray that the winter comes early. Rule number 6. Trust the cold. The cold is the only prison that can hold them. The glaciers are the bars. The ice is the lock. And as long as the temperatures stay below freezing at those altitudes, as long as the ancient ice remains intact, the creatures inside stay dormant. But the world is warming. The glaciers are retreating at a rate that would have been unimaginable to my great-grandfather. When he first arrived in 1932, scientists estimated the glaciers would last another 1,000 years. Now they say we have maybe 20 years before they're gone completely. When the last glacier melts, there will be nothing left to contain what sleeps beneath. And there is no rule number 7 for that. There are no instructions for what to do when the prison finally breaks. There's only the hope that someone, somewhere, will figure out a solution before it's too late. I've followed these rules for 23 years, I've turned away research teams with legitimate credentials and prestigious funding, inventing excuses that got more creative as the years went by. I've escorted terrified hikers out of the backcountry after they saw things they couldn't explain, and I've watched their faces as they tried to convince themselves that what they saw wasn't real. I've performed the ritual every summer solstice, hiking to the Grinnell Overlook at dawn, speaking words in a language that might be older than humanity itself, making offerings to something I've never seen and hope I never will. And every year, I've watched the glaciers shrink a little more. Every year, I've measured the melt lines and calculated how much time we have left. Every year, I've wondered what happens when the ice finally gives up its secrets. Last summer, I found out. Dr. Catherine Osei arrived at Glacier National Park in late June with a team of 4 graduate students and enough equipment to set up a small research station. She was a paleoclimatologist from MIT, specializing in what she called deep ice records, the atmospheric data trapped in glacial ice that could tell us about Earth's climate going back hundreds of thousands of years. Ice that had never melted since it first formed. Ice that contained air bubbles from before the pyramids were built, before the first cities rose, before humanity existed at all. Her research proposal was impressive. 40 pages of methodology, data analysis plans, and expected outcomes. Her funding came from a coalition of climate research foundations and government agencies concerned about global warming. Her credentials were impeccable. She'd done similar work in Greenland, Antarctica, and the Himalayas, publishing papers in Nature and Science that had reshaped our understanding of ancient climate patterns. And her request was simple. She wanted to extract ice cores from Grinnell Glacier, specifically from a section that her preliminary surveys suggested contained ice dating back over 12,000 years. 12,000 years. The end of the last ice age, the time when these glaciers first formed, when the great ice sheets that had covered most of North America finally began their long retreat. And, according to Blackfeet legend, the time when something terrible was sealed inside them. Something that had walked the earth before humans existed. Something that the old ones, beings from before recorded history, had imprisoned in ice because they couldn't be killed. "I have to deny your permit," I told her in my office, watching her face carefully for her reaction. She was maybe 45, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of focused intensity that came from decades of academic achievement. "The area you're requesting access to is restricted due to unstable ice conditions. Ranger Thompson." She leaned forward, her dark eyes holding mine. "I've reviewed the geological surveys. The ice in that section is some of the most stable in the park. Your restriction doesn't make scientific sense." "Lots of things in these mountains don't make scientific sense, Dr. Osei. That doesn't mean they're not real." She studied me for a long moment. "You know something. Something about what's in that ice. Something that's not in any official report. I know that people who drill too deep into these glaciers have a habit of not coming back. I know that the Blackfeet avoided certain areas of these mountains for thousands of years, and they weren't stupid. And I know that my job is to protect the people who visit this park, even from dangers they don't believe in." "The glaciers are melting," Dr. Osei said quietly. "Whatever is in that ice, whatever you're trying to protect people from, it's going to be exposed eventually. Wouldn't you rather have scientists study it under controlled conditions than have it emerge on its own without warning?" It was a good argument, a logical argument, the kind of argument that might have worked on someone who hadn't spent their entire life guarding secrets that defied logic. "Your permit is denied," I said. "I'm sorry, Dr. Osei. I hope your research takes you somewhere safer." She left without another word. But I saw the look in her eyes, the same look I'd seen in researchers before. The look that said she wasn't going to give up. The look that said she'd find another way. My daughter Amara was 24 that summer, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in environmental science from Stanford. She'd grown up in the park, spent her childhood hiking these trails and swimming in these glacier-fed lakes that were cold enough to stop your heart. She knew the mountains better than most rangers twice her age, every trail, every viewpoint, every hidden waterfall that tourists never found. And she knew about the family legacy. I'd shown her the journal when she turned 18, the same way my father had shown me. She'd read my great-grandfather's account of the 1932 incident, my grandfather's notes about strange sightings in the backcountry, my father's meticulous records of every restricted area and every rule that had to be followed. She'd helped me perform the summer solstice ritual since she was old enough to make the hike to the Grinnell Overlook. She knew the words by heart, even if she didn't understand them. But knowing about something and believing in it are two different things. Amara was a scientist at heart, like me, like her mother before she passed. She trusted data, evidence, peer-reviewed research, hypotheses that could be tested and verified. She respected the family traditions. She would never have helped with the ritual if she didn't. But I could tell she thought of them as exactly that. Traditions. Rituals that had meaning because we gave them meaning, not because they actually did anything. Superstitions that her great-great-grandfather had inherited from the Blackfeet and passed down through generations of well-meaning but ultimately deluded Thompsons. She was about to learn how wrong she was. We all were. A week after I denied Dr. Osei's permit, Amara came to my cabin with news that made my blood run cold. "Dad, something's happening at Salamander Glacier. I was doing my routine patrol of the restricted area and—" She hesitated, her scientific skepticism warring with what her eyes had seen. "The ice is melting faster than anywhere else in the park. Way faster. And there's a smell coming from it. Like something rotting. But also something else. Something chemical, almost. I've never smelled anything like it." I was on my feet before she finished speaking. "Show me." The hike to Salamander Glacier usually took about 4 hours from the nearest trailhead. We made it in 3, pushing hard through terrain that would have exhausted most visitors. The glacier was named for its shape, a long, narrow tongue of ice that curved around the base of a nameless peak, looking vaguely like a salamander crawling down the mountainside. It was also the glacier that my great-grandfather had written about most extensively in his journal. The glacier where the 1932 research team had been drilling when they uncovered something that shouldn't exist. The glacier where, according to Blackfeet legend, the Old Ones had imprisoned something at the dawn of time. I smelled it before I saw it. Amara was right. It was like nothing I'd ever encountered. A thick, organic stench of decay mixed with something sharper, more astringent, like formaldehyde or industrial chemicals. It shouldn't have been possible. There was nothing up here to rot, nothing to generate that kind of smell. Then I saw the glacier, and I understood. A massive section of ice had collapsed, creating a cavern that extended deep into the heart of the glacier. The walls of the cavern glowed with a sickly greenish-blue light, and the temperature inside was at least 20 degrees warmer than it should have been. Meltwater ran in rivers across the floor, carrying chunks of ancient ice into a dark pool at the cavern's center. And floating in that pool, partially freed from the ice that had held them for millennia, were bodies. Not human bodies. Something else entirely. Something that made my mind want to reject what my eyes were seeing, like trying to read text in a language that shouldn't exist. They were humanoid in shape. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But the proportions were wrong in ways that made my stomach turn. Too long, too thin, with joints that bent in directions human anatomy didn't allow. Their limbs had too many segments, bending backward and forward like the legs of insects. Their fingers, if you could call them fingers, were nearly a foot long, tapering to points that looked sharp enough to cut bone. Their skin was gray and translucent, like ice that had been frozen for too long, showing networks of black veins beneath the surface that pulsed with something that wasn't blood. And their faces were the worst part. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, blank ovals of that gray, translucent skin, featureless as eggs, as if whatever created them hadn't bothered to give them a way to see or breathe or speak. They didn't need those things. I understood that immediately. These weren't creatures that had evolved naturally. These weren't animals or aliens or anything that biology could explain. These were something older, something that existed before the rules of life on Earth had been written. Something that didn't need eyes because it perceived reality in ways we couldn't comprehend. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all frozen in positions of reaching, grasping, climbing, as if they'd been trying to escape the ice when it trapped them. Some were climbing over each other, creating pyramids of frozen bodies that reached toward the cavern ceiling. Others were clawing at the ice walls, their 2 long fingers leaving grooves in the frozen surface, all of them reaching, all of them trying to get out. "Dad!" Amara's voice was barely a whisper, shaking with a terror that went beyond fear into something more primal. "What the hell are those things?" Before I could answer, one of them moved. It was subtle at first, just a twitch of those impossibly long fingers, a slight shift in position that could have been the ice settling or the water currents moving the body. But then its head turned toward us, that blank face somehow finding us despite having no eyes, orienting on us with a precision that made my skin crawl. It knew we were there. It had known from the moment we entered the cavern. The smooth skin of its face rippled like water disturbed by a stone, and a vertical slit opened where its mouth should have been. The slit widened, revealing rows of teeth that looked like shards of black ice, not arranged like human teeth, but scattered randomly across the inside of the mouth like broken glass. The teeth moved independently, clicking against each other in patterns that might have been language. It made a sound, not a voice, not anything that could be produced by lungs or vocal cords or any apparatus evolution had ever designed. A frequency, a vibration that I felt in my chest, in my skull, in the deepest part of my brain where instinct still remembered what it was like to be hunted by things that saw humans as food. It was the sound of something ancient and hungry waking up after a very, very long sleep. "Run," I said, my voice barely working. "Amara, run! Now!" We turned and fled, our boots slipping on the wet ice, our lungs burning in the strange warm air of the cavern. The sound followed us, that terrible vibration, growing louder as it was joined by other voices, other mouths opening, other things waking up. I could hear ice cracking behind us as more bodies pulled free from their frozen prison, the wet slap of inhuman feet on melting ice, the clicking of black ice teeth in the darkness. We made it out of the cavern and kept running, not stopping until we'd put half a mile between us and the glacier. When I finally looked back, gasping for breath in the thin mountain air, I could see the cavern mouth glowing with that sickly green light, and silhouettes were moving inside, dozens of shapes pulling themselves from the ice, testing limbs that hadn't moved in 10,000 years, turning their blank faces toward the world that had changed so much while they slept. "What do we do?" Amara was shaking, her scientific worldview shattered in an instant. "Dad, what the hell do we do?" I pulled out my radio, already knowing that what I was about to do might not be enough, might not even slow them down. But it was all I had. "All stations, this is Ranger Thompson. I'm declaring a code black at Salamander Glacier. Repeat, code black. Evacuate all visitors from the backcountry immediately. Close all trails above 6,000 feet. And get me Dr. Catherine Osei. If she's still in the area, I need her at the ranger station within the hour." Amara stared at me. You're going to work with her? After you denied her permit? I denied her permit because I wanted to keep this contained. That's not an option anymore. I looked back at the glacier, at the green glow spreading across the ice like an infection. Now I need someone who understands what we're dealing with. Someone who might be able to help us put these things back to sleep, or figure out how to destroy them before they spread. Can they be destroyed? I don't know. The journal doesn't say. The Blackfeet never destroyed them. They just sealed them away. I started hiking toward the trailhead, toward the ranger station, toward whatever came next. But the Blackfeet had 10,000 years and the entire Ice Age on their side. We have maybe days before those things figure out how to leave that glacier, so we'd better find another way. Dr. Osai was waiting at the ranger station when we arrived, her expression a mixture of vindication and genuine fear. Word of the evacuation had spread quickly, and she'd heard enough from fleeing hikers to know that something terrible was happening in the backcountry. "What did you find?" she asked, all professional hostility gone from her voice. "The hikers coming down are talking about sounds from the glaciers, lights. Some of them say they saw shapes in the ice." I told her everything. The journal, the rules, the 1932 incident. The Blackfeet legends about the old ones. Beings that had existed on this planet long before humanity. Beings that had been sealed in ice when the last glacial period began. I told her about the creatures in Salamander Glacier, about their blank faces and black ice teeth, about the sound they made that seemed to bypass ears entirely and speak directly to something primal in the human brain. To her credit, she listened without interruption. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, processing information that contradicted everything her scientific training had taught her. "The ice cores," she said finally. "The ones I wanted to extract. I wasn't just looking for climate data. My preliminary surveys detected anomalies in the ice, organic signatures that shouldn't exist at those depths. I thought it might be ancient bacteria or extremophile organisms, evidence of life forms that could survive conditions we thought were impossible." She laughed bitterly. "I was more right than I knew." "Can you help us?" I asked. "Is there anything in your research, your equipment, that might help us contain these things? Or destroy them?" "I'm a paleoclimatologist, not a weapons designer. I study ice, not whatever those things are." She rubbed her temples, thinking hard. "But if the cold is what's been keeping them dormant, maybe we can use that. Extreme cold. Artificial, if necessary. We brought portable cryogenic equipment for preserving samples. Industrial-grade liquid nitrogen delivery systems, if we could get close enough." "You want to refreeze them?" Amara said. "Push them back into hibernation." "It's a theory. The coldest temperatures on Earth can't approach what liquid nitrogen can achieve. If these creatures have been dormant because of glacial ice at maybe 20 degrees below zero, what happens when you expose them to minus 320? "Either they freeze solid and stop moving," I said, "or we make them angry." "Do you have a better idea?" I didn't. None of us did. We organized the operation overnight. Dr. Osi and her team repurposed their cryogenic equipment, mounting the nitrogen tanks on all-terrain vehicles that could navigate the rough trails to Salamander Glacier. I gathered every ranger who was willing to go, and to my surprise, most of them volunteered. These were people who'd spent their careers in these mountains. People who knew something was wrong even if they didn't understand what. People who weren't willing to let their park become ground zero for something out of a nightmare. Amara insisted on coming. I tried to talk her out of it, but she had her mother's stubbornness and her great-great-grandfather's courage. "This is our legacy," she said. "If I'm going to inherit the journal, if I'm going to keep these mountains safe for another generation, I need to understand what we're fighting. I need to see it." We reached Salamander Glacier at dawn. The first light was just touching the peaks, painting them gold and rose in a way that would have been beautiful if we hadn't been hiking toward a nightmare. The situation was worse than I'd feared, worse than I'd thought possible. The cavern had expanded overnight, melting ice at a rate that defied every law of thermodynamics I'd ever learned. The entire front face of the glacier had collapsed, revealing a warren of tunnels and chambers that extended deep into the mountain like the burrows of some enormous insect colony. The temperature in the area was at least 30 degrees warmer than it should have been, as if the creatures were generating their own heat, as if their awakening was accelerating the melt that had freed them. And the creatures, there were more of them now. Many more. They'd pulled themselves from the ice by the hundreds, forming clusters on the glacier's surface like insects swarming a disturbed hive. In the dawn light, I could see them more clearly than I had in the cavern. Their gray skin had a faint iridescence to it, like oil on water. Their 2 long limbs moved with a fluid grace that no earthly creature possessed. And as we approached, they became aware of us. They turned toward us as one. Hundreds of blank faces, all oriented in our direction with perfect synchronization. Hundreds of vertical mouths opening in unison, releasing that terrible harmonic frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur and my thoughts scatter like startled birds. It wasn't just sound, it was something else, something that bypassed ears entirely and spoke directly to the oldest, most primitive part of the human brain, the part that remembered being prey. Some of the rangers dropped their equipment, clutching their heads. One of Dr. Osei's graduate students fell to his knees, blood trickling from his nose. Even I, who had heard that sound before, felt my knees buckle under the weight of it. "Now!" Dr. Osei shouted, her voice cutting through the frequency with the force of pure human will. "Fire everything now!" Her team opened the nitrogen valves. The cryogenic systems roared to life, sending clouds of supercooled vapor billowing across the glacier like fog from hell frozen over. Temperatures plummeted wherever the liquid touched, dropping 100 degrees in seconds, 200 degrees, 300. The air itself seemed to crystallize, ice forming on every surface within the blast radius. The creatures nearest to us screamed, an actual sound this time, not that terrible frequency, but something almost human. High and piercing, like ice cracking under pressure, like something that had never felt cold before suddenly learning what cold really meant. They tried to flee, their 2 long limbs scrambling for purchase on the suddenly frozen ground, but the cold was faster. Their movement slowed, then stopped. Their gray skin turned white with frost. One by one, they froze in place, trapped once again in temperatures even colder than the glacial ice that had held them for millennia. For a moment, I thought it was going to work. For a moment, I thought we might actually win this. But there were too many of them. The nitrogen was running out. We'd brought everything Dr. Osei's team had, everything we could requisition from labs and hospitals across western Montana, and it still wasn't enough. And the creatures further from the blast zone had learned from their frozen companions. They watched with those eyeless faces as the nitrogen clouds dissipated, as the temperatures slowly began to rise again. Then they retreated into the tunnels, into the depths of the glacier where the cold couldn't reach them, where they could wait until the danger passed. They were smart. God help us, they were smart. And patient. And they had all the time in the world. "We need to seal the entrance," I said. "Collapse the cavern. Bury them under 1,000,000 tons of rock and ice." "That won't hold them forever," Dr. Osei said. "The ice is still melting. The climate is still warming. Even if we seal this glacier, they'll find another way out eventually. Then we buy time. We figure out a permanent solution. We find a way to actually destroy them, not just contain them." I looked at my daughter, at the journal tucked into her pack, at the legacy she was inheriting whether she wanted it or not. My family has been buying time for 4 generations. Maybe the 5th will be the one that finally ends this. We collapsed the cavern that afternoon, controlled explosives, carefully placed by a demolitions expert from the National Guard, who asked no questions and received no answers. The charges brought down the mountain's face in a cascade of rock and ice that buried the entrance completely. Thousands of tons of debris sealing the cavern like a tomb. The frozen creatures were entombed once again, along with the ones that had retreated into the depths. It took 3 days for the dust to settle, 3 days of watching the rubble, waiting to see if anything would dig its way out. Nothing did. The temperature in the area slowly returned to normal. The strange heat that had accelerated the melt faded away. Whatever the creatures had been doing to warm their prison, it stopped when we buried them. It wouldn't last. We all knew it wouldn't last. The ice was still melting, everywhere across the park. Climate change hadn't stopped just because we'd won one battle. And somewhere deep beneath that rubble, hundreds of ancient beings were waiting for their next chance at freedom. But it was enough for now. Enough to buy us time. Enough to let us prepare for whatever came next. Dr. Osei stayed in the area, setting up a permanent monitoring station disguised as a climate research facility. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come here to study ice cores, and now she was dedicating her career to making sure no one ever drilled into this ice again. She's studying the creatures we managed to capture, fragments of frozen tissue that survived the nitrogen blast, samples of the strange black fluid that runs through their veins instead of blood. Looking for weaknesses, looking for answers, looking for a way to end this once and for all. She calls me every month with updates. So far, she's learned that the creatures are definitely not from Earth. Their cellular structure is like nothing in any biological database. Their genetic material uses proteins that don't exist in any terrestrial organism. She's learned that they communicate through that harmonic frequency, a kind of telepathy that operates on vibrations rather than electromagnetic signals. And she's learned that they're old, impossibly old. Carbon dating on the tissue samples suggests they've been frozen for at least 50,000 years, and that might just be when they were last awake, not when they first came to this planet. Amara took over my position as head ranger last spring. I'm too old for the job now, too worn down by decades of carrying this secret, too damaged by what I saw in that cavern and what I felt when those creatures turned their blank faces toward me. But I still live in the park. I still perform the summer solstice ritual every year, speaking the words that Running Wolf taught my great-grandfather almost a century ago. And I still watch the glaciers shrink a little more every season, knowing that the clock is ticking down towards something terrible. The things in the ice are patient. They've waited 10,000 years. They can wait a little longer, but the ice won't last forever. Nothing does. And when the last glacier melts, when the last frozen prison finally opens, they'll be ready. If you ever visit Glacier National Park, enjoy the scenery. Take the drive along Going to the Sun Road while you still can. It's one of the most beautiful drives in America, 50 miles of hairpin turns and sheer cliffs and views that will take your breath away. Photograph the waterfalls cascading down the mountainsides. Count the wildflowers that carpet the alpine meadows in summer. Watch the mountain goats perched on impossible cliffs, and the bighorn sheep grazing in the morning mist, and the grizzly bears fishing in the streams below. But stay on the marked trails. Don't wander into restricted areas no matter how beautiful the ice looks or how close you want to get to the glaciers. They're melting fast, faster every year, and the ground around them is unstable in ways that go far beyond loose rock and hidden crevasses. And if you smell something strange near one of the glaciers, something like rot mixed with chemicals, something organic and alien and wrong, turn around immediately. Don't investigate. Don't take photos. Don't convince yourself it's just your imagination. Just get off that mountain as fast as your legs will carry you, and don't stop until you're back in your car driving toward the park exit. The ice preserves everything. It has been preserving things since before humans walked upright, since before mammals ruled the earth, since before whatever cosmic accident first brought those creatures to our world. It remembers what it contains. It keeps them safe and frozen and waiting. And every year, as the temperatures rise and the ice retreats, more of those memories are coming loose. The Blackfeet were right. Some things should stay frozen forever. Some doors should never be opened, and some secrets should die with the ice that holds them. But the ice is melting, and nothing we do can stop it. All we can do is prepare for what comes out.